Yeah, so as Tanya said, my name is John Thompson. I'm the Science Services Manager at CCST, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about executive summaries and how we approach writing them for a policy audience, and maybe some other tools that are going to be useful for that same sort of audience when it comes to thinking about how you're presenting your work in brief. So before we dive in, I'll say a little bit about CCST. But for those of you who've never heard of us, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit that was created at the request of the state legislature in 1988 to act as a source of science and technology advice to the state. And that includes the legislature, the executive branch, any other state entities. We have formal partnerships with 12 institutions across California, 6 educational institutions, UC, CSU, community colleges, Caltech, Stanford, and USC, and then 6 Department of Energy, or a combination of 4 Department of Energy labs and 2 NASA research centers. You might have encountered our science fellows. We administer the CCST Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program, which is a 1-year program for PhD scientists and engineers, where they get placed in the legislature or executive branch for a year of public service and leadership training. Happy to answer questions about CCST and either now or at the end of the presentation, or if you want to reach out to me. Great. So we're here to talk about executive summaries. Also, if people have questions at any time, I think there will be a Q&A that you can hop in. You can also pop things in the chat, or if you really feel like you are need to, raise your hands and just turn on the mic and ask it. So I'll also have a couple spots to stop to check in. All right, so executive summaries. What do we mean by executive summaries? Typically, when I think about an executive summary, and there are probably a few different definitions of this, I think about a short document or a section of a document or a report that summarizes the entirety of the report, such that a reader who only reads that section can take away the main conclusions of the report without having to read it in its entirety. For those of you who are coming from academic backgrounds, this differs from an abstract, which I think a lot of people kind of think of as a summary of a paper, which is more of a brief kind of context-setting statement that invites the readers to read the full article or paper to get a better sense of what the conclusions are. Now, why would you want to write an executive summary? Spend all this time putting the report together. Why spend an additional, however long it takes, week maybe, writing an executive summary? Unfortunately, in the policy world, and I saw there are some policy folks on the call, so they probably can speak to this a little bit, but most of your audience is not going to read the full report, but they do want to understand the takeaways and the conclusions. And so this is your chance to emphasize what is the main takeaway of this document that you've spent all this time putting together. And it's really important because if you don't frame the message and communicate it effectively, someone else might do it for you. I think we've all probably seen headlines where someone reports that a new study says that, doing this will kill you, or eating 5 pieces of chocolate a day will improve your heart health. And there are, when you dive into the study, there are often significantly more nuances and caveats that come with it. So it's really important for you to be able to sort of set the message that you want your readers to take away. Ooh. Oh, there we go. So I tried to kind of distill down some of the main qualities of an effective executive summary here. First, and probably most important, you want it to be short. Remember, this is a time-saving thing for people who are really busy, who don't necessarily have the time to read a 100-page report. So you want to make sure that you are maximizing the use of their time in communicating your message. So my rule of thumb is 5 to 10 pages for a 100-page report. But if you can get it shorter, fantastic. And you want to lead off with the core message. Like if they only read the first page of your executive summary, hopefully they can get a sense for what the rest of the report will say. Really important, probably this third point, maybe the most important of all of these. You want to make sure that you're using accessible language, particularly for who the target audience of your report or publication is. I'll talk a little bit more about how we think about audience. Oh, my cat decided that he wants to be a part of this workshop as well. This is Mouse, so he might pop in and out. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about thinking about your target audience and how to uh, 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 tailor your message for them. But that's really important to be thinking about. Obviously, whenever we publish something, we want to make sure that we want everyone to read it. But at the end of the day, I think it's really important to think about who the real main sort of if you could only pick one group to come walk away reading your report, who it is. Really important. The executive summary shouldn't contain any information that's not contained in the body of the report as well. It might seem like common sense, but it's really critical that anything that is contained in your executive summary you can find often fleshed out in more detail in the report itself. But you don't want there to be things that are not in the report in the executive summary. It should have a conclusion. I think that like I said, it should be a standalone piece of text that kind of explains the whole thing. So it's important for a conclusion to be there, and it should stand on its own. Oftentimes, when we publish reports at CCST, we'll publish the executive summary as a separate document because we really want to stress that it's a standalone piece that can hopefully explain the full takeaways of the report for its readers. So to that point about your audience, we'll talk a little bit about how I think about approaching this question. Every stakeholder, every community, every organization, they'll have their particular culture and context for approaching particular topics. They'll come with different sort of understandings of technical information. They'll come with different jargons, different shorthands that they use. And so it's really important to, when you're developing a report, especially if you're developing something for a policy audience, to identify who you're communicating to and like really get at what they care about. And then with that information, kind of craft your message to align with the focus of your audience. So I think there's a lot of folks on here, so maybe we won't do this as an interactive thing. But in the past, when I've done this a workshop, I've kind of posed these two questions to the audience at this point, which is when you hear about policy audience, who do you think of? And when you're thinking of that sort of group of people, what are the interests and needs of that audience? So maybe take just like a 10 seconds to think about these questions. And as you're coming into this conversation, who do you think that this sort of encapsulates, and what are the main yeah, maybe drop some thoughts into the chat. The main sort of interests and needs of that kind of audience. Give like maybe, I don't know, 30 seconds or so. All right, ledge staff, governor's staff, agency staff needing data to make decisions. I'm looking back through the chat and I'm seeing that a lot of most of the folks who responded are in state government to some extent. So perhaps I am preaching to the audience, the target audience here. Maybe feel free to add to what I'm about to say in terms of what you are looking at, looking for when you're engaging with reports from research organizations. Let's see. Policy areas, legislators, more broad and general without overly technical terms. Sure. Great. Advocates and lobbyists. Awesome. Okay. So yeah. So when we think about a policy audience, we kind of all of these stakeholders that you just mentioned includes elected officials, their staff, um, people in the executive or legislative branch, or other areas. It can include academics who are particularly engaged in the policy arena. It includes lobbyists and advocates who are doing work to advance the interests of specific groups. And it can include it can include other community members, other folks who are engaging with the government or with the policymaking process in some capacity. Within that audience, there's often a pretty wide array of subject matter expertise. I imagine there's the same just on this call itself. You might have folks engaging with your material who are complete beginners who have just joined an office and their member decided that they're going to be the person coordinating all of the office work on energy policy. And so they're trying to get up to speed. Or they could be someone, who is a long-term committee consultant who has been in this area for, decades already. Oftentimes, these staffers are doing a million different things. There's not a lot of time, not a lot of bandwidth to read every report that gets sent into their inbox. So they'll likely only read the first few pages. And your report's going to be competing for their attention. They're often being pulled in a million different directions. They'll have different folks coming into the office, looking for their time. So you want to make sure that you're presenting a compelling bit of information in a environment that is often very noisy. Yeah, what do policymakers care about? I think I worked in the building for a little bit. I did the CCST Science Fellowship 10 years ago now. And so I'm sure there are a lot of different answers and people have different experiences with this question. But in my experience, I think at the end of the day, most folks who work in policy do care about making a difference in California, making a difference for its citizens, the economy, the environment. If you're talking about specific elected officials, they really care about their district or their specific jurisdiction. So thinking about how your work might tie into a specific sort of locality that folks are interested in is a really powerful tool to have in your toolbox. It is politics. People care about their reputation as informed decision makers. And oftentimes, and I think someone said in the response, they want data for decision making. You know, Academics and science can often be really great for pointing out a specific problem or pointing out a trend, but not always great at saying what is the answer here or what is the approach. There are often value judgments that get packed into that science has a less easy time weighing in on. But it's important to think about if someone's approaching this report because they want to do something, making sure they're taking away an actionable takeaway. And then last, but not least, certainly not least, maybe this should be on the top of the list, is money. At the end of the day, there's always, a concern about how much something will cost. Will this save money? Will we have to generate a bunch of new revenue to do something? So when you're thinking about making policy recommendations or writing for policy audiences, that's the price tag of particular actions or the lack of particular actions is always going to be on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. So now I thought it might be helpful to kind of walk through an executive summary that we wrote for a recent report that was published in 2023, I believe. So CCST has done a lot of work in recent years on fire in California. It's a topic that's been on the forefront of a lot of policymakers' minds. And this particular report was about the links between forest health, fire, smoke, and public health. So, we published this 200 plus page report looking at these links between, forest management practices, wildfire smoke, and health outcomes. Included a bunch of interviews with healthcare practitioners, looking at data sets, all sorts of interesting things. And as part of that report, we made 61 findings, conclusions, and recommendations, which is sort of a bit of a jargon that we use in our study process and how we sort of reach consensus when it comes to the takeaways from our reports. But it's less important about what these technically mean, but essentially there's a bunch of recommendations in this report. So the challenge then becomes, how do we condense this down to like a 5 to 10 page document that someone can take away and read. So you can find this report on our website. I probably should have included a link or a QR code or something, but I'll have screenshots of the executive summary here just to kind of show a few things as I point them out as we talk about them. But this is the first page of the executive summary. And I just want to kind of point out a few things. If nothing else, if someone reads only this page, I think they get a pretty good idea of what the 200 plus pages of the report say. We kick it off with a very short, very memorable quote that sort of sums up the entirety of what we're want readers to take away. And then kind of walk through the broad sort of structure and conclusions of the report. We talk about how this report, what the report investigates. We highlight knowledge gaps, the data, research, and collaboration needed to effectively fill them, and steps that the state of California or the government can take to ensure the improved health of all who live under frequently smoky skies. And then we point to our 4 kind of broad findings of the report. These are kind of, if we wanted a reader or policymaker, a healthcare practitioner who is reading this report to only take away a few things, these would be the 4 things that we did. We wanted them to. And this is sort of what the report gets at. So that's the first page. And honestly, I think that, our thinking here is that if someone only reads this page, they're can walk away knowing what the report looks like. But there's still, more that we include in the executive summary to give a broad, to give a good sense for a reader. So the second bit is kind of background. This is sort of setting the stage, explaining how we got to where we are and what the question that the report is trying to grapple with is. So this really kind of is the context setting piece. If folks have read that first section and are like, okay, I want to know a little bit more, the next few pages kind of hopefully place the reader in the context for where this conversation is happening and where this report is attempting to provide information. The second half of the summary after that is focused on the actual sort of conclusions of each chapter in the report. And so if you read through this, it talks about the sort of findings, conclusions, and recommendations, which again is a sort of a byproduct of our study process. I can talk more about that if you want to hear about our study process. But for the purposes of this presentation, it's really only important to know that that is sort of the kind of tidbits that we hope are the main conclusions and takeaways and recommendations that the reader leaves with. So we have a summary of each chapter in the report, and then the major conclusions from that chapter. And then finally, we end with some closing thoughts. I mentioned that it's really important to summarize your executive summary and the report at the ends and really kind of drive that message home. So we end with a short little conclusion that kind of wraps up the closing thoughts, emphasizes the final takeaways that we want our audience to internalize, and kind of maybe poses some questions for policymakers, kind of in terms of where the report authors see the conversation going next. So that is kind of the kernel of what an executive summary looks like and is attempting to do. So to summarize the summary, and sort of the things that I've talked about so far. An executive summary is a brief document or section of a document that condenses and summarizes the key points of a longer report. It should be written in accessible language to your audience, not contain information that is not in the longer report, and be able to stand on its own if a reader only reads that. And if that is all that they take away, then the reader should end with a good idea of what the report contains and what the major conclusions are. So I think at this point, I maybe pause for a little bit and turn it over to you all. If you have any questions about what you heard so far, comments. I have some other stuff I want to talk about other ways to kind of summarize reports or content or research that you're doing when you're engaging with policymakers. But maybe take this time to kind of hear from you all if you have questions about executive summaries or anything that I've said so far. Kat certainly has some questions.
You say your cat's name was Mouse?
The cat's name is Mouse, yes.
I love it. That's amazing. I'm interested in hearing what else, like what other recommendations or other pieces that you have. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can go on, and then maybe we'll see if this sparks anything else. And then I'm happy to chat more about that. Yeah, so I think executive summaries are really great. They're really important. A report having a good executive summary is really key to getting the contents of that report in, on the radar of people that need to see it. But I feel like they're mostly useful for that. For like if you have a really long document that you are trying to get out in front of your audience as much as possible. That's what they're really great for. But there are lots of other things you might be trying to communicate, or you might be trying to summarize into like more accessible formats. And I think that executive summaries, are often sometimes even too long. Okay. I see a question coming in. Oops. I'll finish this thought and then I'll talk about that question. But yeah, sometimes executive summaries can be too long, right? Policy world is moving really fast. Staffers, policymakers have incredible time constraints, incredible demands on their attention spans and their work time. So it's really important to think about where this might be useful. All right, actually, I'm seeing a couple questions coming in now, so maybe I'll pause and address them. So Margaret asked about, I'd be curious to hear more about how you think the summary should include recommendations and comments on policy, and how would that look? So our typical approach when we do executive summaries is, especially when it comes to policy recommendations, is that we essentially tie the policy recommendations that we produce in our summaries to wherever they are in our report. So in the example that I just showed of the smoke report, we included sort of a chapter by chapter summary of what the major policy recommendations were. So that was sort of the meat of the executive summary, about 7 pages, where for each of the 5 chapters in the report, there was a brief overview of what the policy recommendations were. And then on that first page was sort of a synthesis of kind of a summary of what the general kind of intent of those policy recommendations were. So if we go back and look at that first page, they're less making specific recommendations and more kind of talking about the broad trends, right? Wildfire smoke impacts health and health sector organizations' workforces, operations, and ability to provide services, yet the costs are quantified. quantifying these costs would enable state and local health sector organizations to make more informed decisions regarding budgeting, resource allocation, and response. So if you go into the actual body of the report, there are a lot of recommendations around specific sort of types of data that should be collected or specific outcomes that we should look at. And those are kind of broken down into more granular recommendations in the report itself, but this is kind of a more broad overview. I think that when it comes to including that in the report, I think in the executive summary, I think it really comes down to like, is that the point of the report? If the report is looking to make recommendations about specific policy, then the executive summary should absolutely reflect that. Someone who reads it should, get a sense for the recommendations that the report itself is making. I think it's important to tie when you're actually writing them, maybe tie them to explicitly to where in the report they're fleshed out more. But if that is in the report, and if that's a major takeaway you want your audience to have, then it 100% should be in the executive summary. There was also a question about the first person versus the third person, which is a really great question. And I think you'll get a lot of probably different answers when it comes to this. You'll notice that in this executive summary, we did write it in the first person. We sort of said that we, our report examines the connections between forest management, blah, 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 blah. We highlight the knowledge gaps in the data. Broadly, we find X, Y, Z. I've kind of read good executive summaries that are in both first and third person. I think if you're writing it in third person, the report tends to go into the passive voice, which I think just as a reader, I enjoy reading less. But I think that again, a good executive summary can be written in either the first or the third person. But I do know that there are probably some. I do think there are some, maybe more old school thinkers who don't like the first person reading sort of academic or analytical writing in the first person. But so maybe depending on if it's for a more academic audience, it might make more sense to write in the third person. But I don't think it's. I think the content is more important ultimately at the end of the day. Okay, if the research is not geared towards policy, how do you recommend staffers approach researchers about their report and about developing policy based on their data? That's a great question. That's kind of something that CCST does a lot of. We're often reaching out to researchers who are doing policy relevant work and connecting them to policymakers who, where there are information gaps. When it comes to reaching out, I think, it's being really upfront with your intentions for reaching out is helpful. But I think there's also a little bit of, I don't know what the right word is, convincing sometimes that needs to be done. I've often found when I'm talking to academic researchers, there's a sense of like, I don't know. I'm an academic by training. I have a PhD in material science, and I think that doing a PhD makes you really good at knowing the things that you don't know. And I think that academics will often kind of be like, "Oh, I'm not the right expert to make this, recommendation, or maybe I'm not quite the right person to talk about this." So there's kind of some level of convincing that you often have to do to get at to access their expertise. That's not to say that's always the case. There are certainly a lot of folks who are more than willing to tell you what they think about how the government should work. But I think the most important thing is just kind of being upfront and kind of acknowledging some of these things. We know that like you might not be able to like have data that supports every potential course of action, or you haven't been able to like look at all these things. But oftentimes, as policymakers were kind of operating with incomplete information. And so maybe we're a little bit more comfortable kind of making decisions in that space than researchers might be. And so kind of talking them through that discomfort is part of it. But you can also always reach out to CCST if you need help with that. We have a lot of experience kind of navigating these conversations between policymakers and researchers, and you know, are always here to kind of help foster those conversations and make those connections. So all really great questions. So yeah, so just going back, let's see, down, kind of maybe go through this next couple of slides uh, relatively quickly, but if you have more questions as I'm going through, please feel free to drop them. Yeah, so just thinking about how, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other ways that we condense material to try to reach a broader audience. And the first thing is always to just, think about what you're trying to summarize. There are all sorts of answers to this question. Executive summaries are really great for summarizing reports, but depending on where you're coming from or who you're talking with, you might be trying to summarize all sorts of things. It could be a shorter paper. It could be a research project that doesn't necessarily have, a printed set of data yet. It could be a panel discussion that you are putting on or that you've put on. It could be a workshop that occurred over the course of a day and a half that you're trying to get at the main takeaways of. Or you could just be trying to summarize you. Sometimes, I think, especially for the folks on this call who are in the legislature or in government, oftentimes you're at these, events with other people working in similar, working in a similar setting, and you got a short amount of time to summarize who you are and why you're at a place. And that, like writing an executive summary is also a skill that you can practice. So the one pager and fact sheet is a pretty frequent example that you'll see. I think a lot of folks will see around here. Here's an example of a one pager that we put together for a briefing that we put on a couple of years ago on agrovoltaics. I think that in a world that has increasingly moved online in the last 5 years, maybe this is not quite as prevalent as it used to be. But there is, I think, still something very nice about a single sort of sheet of paper, maybe front and back, that can summarize like a report, an event, an issue, provide some useful information for someone who's trying to get up to speed on something very quickly, and provide maybe some easy links to follow up and get more information, whether they're contacts, in this case, contacts with particular experts that we, encourage attendees to reach out to who can provide more information on these topics, or sort of resources that are more in depth that policymakers can go out to. So yeah, it includes key takeaways from the product that you're trying to summarize. Hopefully there's an eye-catching graphic or picture. If you have a really good image or a graph or something like that, this is the perfect place to include that. And then, yeah, most importantly, contact information or links so that those who take it away and want to follow up and get more information know how to find you, or know how to find, how to access the information that you're ultimately trying to disseminate to them. And so the other thing that I wanted to talk about is the elevator pitch. I think this is a hugely useful thing to have in your back pocket for all sorts of different things, and is a fairly easy skill to practice, right? So having a pitch for your report, for your project, for yourself, is a really great thing to think about and spend some time on. So when I think of an elevator pitch, and I'm sure many of you have probably gone through this or been on the receiving end or giving end of one of these before, but I think about a short, like, minute tops little speech, telling someone about who you are and why they should want to work with you if you're talking about yourself, or if you're talking about a report, like kind of summarizing like, what did this report trying to do and what is the takeaway? And the goal is, you want your listener to want to learn more about you and your work. And, as you might expect, called this because it should be delivered it should be able to be delivered in the time it takes to ride an elevator with somebody. So yeah, the elevator pitch, and this is adapted from a presentation that I normally give to our fellows who are coming in and learning about kind of adapting to the kind of policy world after having spent the last 5+ years in academia. So here I'm kind of talking specifically about how you present yourself, but I think you can just as easily adapt this to how you present particular project that you're working on or a particular report that you've published. But yeah, the elevator pitch is an opportunity to tell your audience about this thing, right? What's the conclusion of your research? Why should they care? What can they do if they want to try to address this question? Or it's an opportunity to tell people about yourself. What are you interested in? What are your skills and your backgrounds? What do you want to do? How can you help each other potentially? So this is something that I think it's just always good to keep in back of the mind about how you're approaching these types of interactions. Elevator pitch comes with a lot of challenges, as you might imagine. You want to be concise, you want to be interesting. Most importantly, which is sensing a theme, you want to use language that's accessible. Obviously, depending on where you're giving an elevator pitch, if you're giving it at a conference, about voltaics, to use an example that I just used, then yeah, there's probably a pretty good chance that everyone there understands the jargon. But if you're at a networking reception, you don't know necessarily where the person you're chatting with is coming from. So it's really important to be ready to talk to a general audience at any time. You're trying to entice the listener to learn more about you, but condense oftentimes years of work, years of experience into a short little blurb. So just a couple pieces of advice about what to include and exclude. You want to include specific examples that highlight you and your work. What do you do well? So like, do you have professional accomplishments, awards, common threads in your work? Are there particular topics that you've worked on a lot, skills or experiences that you have? What you'd like to do? And if we're talking specifically in the policy world, what are the sort of policy connections to the work that you do? What are who are the people that should be, that you'd want to be engaging with your work when it comes to informing policy decisions? And like I said, you want to avoid jargon and detailed descriptions. Those are for the follow-up. Once you have them on the line, then you can drop that stuff. So here's I wrote up a short little one for myself that I've used plenty of times, variations on this for people. Just to give you an example, my name's John. I'm the Science Services Manager at the California Council on Science and Technology. We connect California leaders with science and technology advice to help inform policymaking. I have 10 years of experience in the policy sector. I've worked for the California State Senate on issues related to energy, cannabis, and tax policy. And I'm interested in working at the boundary between research and policymaking, connecting science directly to the decision makers. So, it's good to practice these because it's easy to ramble. It's easy to lose specifics of things that you're trying to present when you talk to folks. So every once in a while, I think about how I want to present something and how I want to talk about it with different people. So we didn't do formal introductions. Normally, I kind of when I run this, I have people kind of introduce themselves at the start and say, who they are, where they're coming from, and like a couple sentences about what they're working on. And we didn't do that here. I think there were too many people to do that. But when you are writing these, think about how they change depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a member, is it different than when you're talking to a staffer? If you're talking to an academic who is the head of a research consortium, is it different than if you're talking to an advocate for a particular community? why should they be interested in the thing that you're trying to summarize, and what do you want them to take away from your pitch? And I know it's corny, I know it's hard, but definitely try practicing these things. It makes it so much easier, so much more comfortable if you get it under your belt a few times in a low stakes situation, so that when you do find yourselves in the elevator with that person who, you really want to have read your work, you're ready to go. I'm always happy to talk to folks about any of the things here, anything the work that CCST does. There's my email address. There's our website. I've also included a link to a career guide that we published a while ago for scientists who are navigating the sort of policy world. But please feel free to reach out. And if you do need help